Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is hesitate for 1 second too long. The countdown hovered in the air like a judgment. Bright red digits reflected across the glass of the execution chamber as Jackson Reed stood alone in Control Room 7, 30 feet above the platform, his gloved finger resting lightly on a matte black switch labeled Final Authorization. The room smelled faintly of overheated circuits and sterilized metal. A low electrical hum vibrating through the floor beneath his boots while status lights flickered in precise, emotionless rhythm across the console. Outside the reinforced viewport, the alien woman stood restrained in a column of pale blue light, her silhouette tall, composed, almost statuesque against the vast amphitheater beyond where thousands of silent observers watched from tiered platforms, their forms blurred into a mosaic of color and shadow. Jackson exhaled slowly, watching the oxygen readout blink steady on his wrist display. 98% stable. And tried not to think about the fact that over 1 billion more were watching. From broadcast feeds across the empire, 3 minutes. The system announced in a calm, synthetic voice that didn't belong to any species, any conscience, any doubt. Jackson adjusted his stance, shoulders tight beneath the standard-issue gray operations jacket, every movement rehearsed, every breath measured, because that's what his job required. Precision, distance, obedience. He had done this before. Not many times, but enough to know the routine, enough to trust the system more than himself. The chamber's temperature held at a controlled 68 degrees Fahrenheit, the lighting calibrated to eliminate shadow, to present everything clearly, clinically, without distortion. This wasn't punishment, they said. It was order. Jackson glanced at the data feed scrolling beside him, a column of charges he didn't fully understand, classified beyond his clearance level. Reduced to codes and symbols that meant nothing to a man whose role ended at the press of a single switch. 1 minute, the voice continued, and somewhere behind him a relay clicked, locking the sequence into its final phase. He swallowed, throat dry despite the regulated air, and forced his gaze back to the chamber. That's when she moved. Not a struggle, not resistance, just a subtle shift of posture as her head tilted upward, her eyes lifting toward the glass. Toward him. The contact was immediate, impossible to ignore, like stepping into a current you didn't see until it pulled you under. Her eyes weren't what he expected, not cold, not pleading, but steady, aware, as if she understood exactly where he stood and what he was about to do. Jackson felt something tighten in his chest, a pressure that didn't belong to fear or protocol or training, something quieter, heavier. 10 seconds. The system counted, each number landing with mechanical certainty. His finger hovered over the switch, muscles locking as if waiting for the command to come from somewhere deeper than orders, deeper than habit. 5 seconds. The hum of the room grew louder. Or maybe his pulse did. 3 seconds. The red glow intensified, bathing everything in. A warning light that felt too close, too human. 2 seconds. She didn't look away. 1 second. And for the first time since he had taken this post, Jackson Reed hesitated. The silence stretched just long enough to feel like a mistake as the system failed to receive input, and a sharp tone pulsed through the control room. Not loud but precise. A warning rather than an alarm. Jackson's finger remained suspended above the switch, a fraction of an inch that suddenly carried the weight of everything he had been trained to ignore. Execution delay detected. The system announced, still calm, still neutral, as if hesitation were simply another variable to process. Jackson drew in a slow breath, eyes locked with hers through the reinforced glass, and for a moment the amphitheater, the observers, the empire itself seemed to fade into a distant hum. She did not move, did not plead, did not break eye contact, and that was what unsettled him most, because fear he could understand, anger he could categorize, but this quiet certainty felt like something outside the system entirely. Override required. The voice continued, and a secondary panel illuminated. Beneath his hand, presenting a sequence of authorization prompts that blinked in steady intervals. He had seen this protocol before in simulations, a safeguard designed to ensure compliance, to guide the operator back to the expected path. Jackson shifted his stance, the fabric of his jacket tightening across his shoulders as he leaned slightly closer to the console. reading the prompts that demanded confirmation, identity, intent. His reflection stared back at him in the darkened edge of the screen. Pale, focused, human. Behind him, a door seal clicked softly as additional personnel moved into adjacent corridors, their presence registered only by the faint vibration in the floor and the subtle shift in air pressure. Time continued to move, even if he did not. Final authorization pending. The system said, and the red digits reset, not to 0, but to 30 seconds, granting him one last window to correct what it perceived as an error. Jackson's pulse steadied, not faster, not slower, just clearer, as if his body had decided something before his mind could articulate it. He looked back at her again, searching for something that would make this easier, some indication that the system was right, that the code scrolling beside her name meant what they were supposed to mean. But all he found was that same unwavering gaze, not defiance, not submission, but recognition, as if she understood the choice he was standing inside. Jackson's hand lowered, not toward the black switch, but toward the illuminated override panel, fingers brushing the edge of the interface as the first prompt expanded, requesting biometric confirmation. The room seemed to hold its breath with him, every light, every tone, every silent observer waiting for alignment to be restored. Operator, confirm execution. The voice prompted, and Jackson paused again, just long enough to feel the line he was about to cross. Then, instead of confirming, he selected a different path, one buried 2 layers deeper in the system, a maintenance protocol rarely accessed during live operations. The interface flickered, hesitating for the briefest fraction of a second before accepting his input. Somewhere beyond the walls, deeper within the structure, a relay shifted with a muted click. The chamber lights outside dimmed by a fraction, almost imperceptible, but enough to break the perfect uniformity of the scene. Jackson did not look away from her as the system recalibrated, as warnings began to stack quietly along the edge of his display. For the first time, the process was no longer following its intended course, and neither was he. The interface did not like uncertainty, and it showed in subtle ways as warning indicators multiplied along the edge of Jackson's display. Thin amber lines stacking into a quiet storm while the system attempted to reconcile his unauthorized input with its rigid execution protocol. The hum beneath his boots shifted in pitch, a fraction lower, as if the building itself were adjusting to a new set of instructions it did not fully understand. Maintenance pathway detected. The voice announced, no longer entirely neutral, a faint distortion threading through its cadence as higher priority processes competed for control. Jackson kept his hand steady against the console, fingertips resting on the illuminated surface while lines of code scrolled faster than before, each string carrying commands meant to reroute power, to pause non-essential sequences, to buy time measured in seconds rather than minutes. Outside the glass, the pale blue column around her flickered once, a ripple of light that broke the perfect stillness of the chamber and drew a subtle shift from the distant audience, a collective movement more sensed than seen. She noticed it too, her posture changing by less than an inch as her eyes narrowed slightly, not in fear, but in awareness. Operator deviation confirmed. The system continued, and this time a secondary tone followed, sharper, designed to alert external monitors. Jackson's jaw tightened as he accessed another layer, deeper, older, a maintenance shell that predated the broadcast protocols, one that still recognized manual command authority. The interface hesitated again, a brief stutter in response time, then opened. He exhaled through his nose, slow and controlled, as new options appeared, not labeled for spectacle, not designed for observation, just raw system. Functions stripped of ceremony. Containment integrity at 98%. The display read, and beneath it a series of controls governing the field that held her in place. Jackson hovered over the parameter, aware of how visible any sudden change would be, aware that every adjustment would ripple outward through the system. Behind him, the faint vibration in the corridor grew more pronounced. Footsteps now distinguishable from machinery, measured and purposeful. Time was narrowing. 30 seconds to external override. The voice warned, its distortion more noticeable now, as if it too felt the strain of contradiction. Jackson glanced at the broadcast timer, still running, still feeding millions of versions of reality that was beginning to fracture at the edges. He looked back at her, and for a brief second the entire room felt quieter, as if the noise of the system had fallen away. She did not ask what he was doing, did not signal, did not move beyond that steady gaze that held him there. Recognition again, and something else beneath it, something that felt like trust before it had any reason to exist. Jackson swallowed, throat tight, and made a decision that did not belong to protocol. His fingers moved with deliberate precision, adjusting the containment field not to shut it down, not yet, but to desynchronize it from the main execution sequence. A change so small it registered as fluctuation rather than failure. The chamber light dimmed another fraction, the blue column softening at the edges like a signal losing focus. Irregularity detected, the system stated, and this time the warning carried urgency. Footsteps stopped just outside the control room door, a pause heavy with intent. Jackson did not turn, did not break eye contact as the console pulsed beneath his hand. Somewhere deep in the structure, locks began to cycle, pathways opening and closing as the system tried to contain what it could not fully predict. He had not freed her, not yet. But the certainty of the outcome had been broken, and in that narrow space between what was expected and what was possible, everything started to change. The door behind Jackson released a soft mechanical hiss. That sounded too calm for what it meant as the seal disengaged and the temperature in the room shifted by a single degree. Just enough for his skin to notice. Just enough for him to know he was no longer alone. He did not turn, not yet, his focus anchored to the console, where the containment field values continued to fluctuate within acceptable margins, not failing, not stable, existing in a narrow space that the system had not been designed to sustain. "Operator Reed," a voice said from behind him, measured, controlled, carrying authority without raising volume. "Step away from the console and confirm execution immediately." Jackson's reflection appeared faintly across the darkened glass, and behind it, another figure took shape, tall, composed, clad in the deep charcoal uniform of Oversight Command, the kind that never entered the room unless something had already gone wrong. Jackson inhaled slowly, feeling the air settle in his lungs as his fingers remained where they were, resting against the interface that now pulsed in a muted rhythm beneath his touch. "System irregularities have been detected," the voice continued, closer now, each word landing with deliberate precision. "You are authorized to correct them." Jackson glanced once at the broadcast feed in the corner of his display, where the image still presented the illusion of control to the watching empire, though a faint distortion had begun to ripple along its edges like heat over asphalt. Outside the chamber, the blue light around her softened again, barely visible, but enough that the perfect symmetry of the scene had been lost. She felt it. He could tell, not because she moved, but because something in her posture changed, a subtle shift from stillness to readiness, like a held breath that had not yet been released. 15 seconds to external override. The system warned, the tone sharper now, urgency threading through its synthetic calm. Jackson lowered his hand slightly, not in surrender, but to access another sequence. One that would not correct the system, but complicate it further. "Operator," the voice behind him said again, closer still, the presence now within a few feet. "This is your final directive." Jackson finally spoke, his voice quiet but steady. "System integrity is holding," he said, eyes still on the console, still on her reflection beyond it. "There is no failure to correct." The silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy, filled with the weight of a decision that both of them now understood. "You are deviating from protocol," the figure replied. And though the words remained controlled, there was something beneath them now, not emotion, but recognition of risk. Jackson's pulse did not spike. It leveled, settling into a clarity that felt almost unfamiliar. He moved his fingers again, selecting a parameter buried beneath the containment field controls, something smaller, less visible, a synchronization buffer tied to the chamber access grid. The interface flickered in response, a thin line of text appearing and disappearing as the system attempted to validate the change. Outside, the base of the chamber emitted a faint shift in light, the floor panels beneath her adjusting by a fraction of an inch, not opening, not unlocking, but no longer perfectly sealed. 10 seconds. The system counted, and this time the number felt real, not procedural, but inevitable. Behind him, the presence did not move closer, did not intervene, as if waiting to see which side of the line he would stand on. Jackson swallowed once, eyes fixed on hers through the glass. That same steady gaze meeting his without hesitation, without demand, only awareness. And in that moment, with the system counting down and the room holding its breath, Jackson Reed chose not to fix what was broken, but to break it further. The countdown reached 5 seconds, and the system's voice sharpened into something almost human as multiple override pathways collided within the control grid, each command contradicting the last, each signal struggling for authority. Jackson's console pulsed with layered alerts, amber shifting toward red, but none of them had fully locked him out yet. None of them had reclaimed control. Override and progress, the system announced, though it no longer sounded certain. Behind him, the figure in the charcoal uniform stepped closer, close. Enough now that Jackson could hear the faint rustle of fabric, the measured breath of someone who understood exactly how narrow this moment had become. Reed. The voice said, quieter this time, less command, more warning. You are out of time. Jackson did not respond, his attention fixed on the synchronization buffer he had just destabilized, watching as the containment field and chamber access grid drifted further out of alignment, fractions of a second becoming whole seconds, becoming a gap the system could not easily reconcile. Outside, the pale blue column flickered again, this time long enough for the amphitheater lights to compensate, a ripple of adjustment passing through the vast space as observers leaned forward, sensing that something was no longer following the script they had been promised. She shifted then, not breaking her restraints, not moving with force, but testing the change. Her posture no longer static, her balance adjusting as if she could feel the field losing its precision. 3 seconds. The system counted, but the number lagged, repeating once before continuing, evidence of the conflict running through its core processes. Jackson's fingers moved again, faster now, not with panic, but with clarity, selecting a manual release handshake that required simultaneous confirmation from both containment and access protocols, a condition that under normal circumstances could never be met during an active execution sequence. But this was no longer normal. The desynchronization widened, just enough. Unauthorized command detected. The system warned, and this time the room answered with a deeper vibration as external locks began to cycle, sealing corridors, isolating the control chamber from the rest of the facility. Jackson felt the floor shift beneath his boots, subtle but real, as if the structure itself were bracing. Step away. The figure behind him said, closer now than ever, the words low, controlled, carrying the weight of a final chance. Jackson finally turned his head, just enough to see the reflection of the other man in the glass, their eyes meeting for a brief second, one bound to protocol, the other already past it. Then Jackson looked forward again. 1 second. The system said, but the timing fractured, stretching, stalling, caught between commands that no longer agreed. Jackson pressed both confirmations at once. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the chamber light collapsed inward, not shutting off, but dimming into something softer, less absolute. And the bass beneath her released with a quiet mechanical shift that echoed louder than any alarm. The blue field did not vanish, but it weakened, thinning at the edges like mist under sunlight. She stepped forward, just 1 step, small, controlled, but enough to cross the invisible line that had held her in place. The system froze, caught between execution and interruption, unable to resolve the contradiction. And in that suspended second, with the Empire watching and the room holding its breath, Jackson Reed did the one thing the system had never been designed to allow. He chose a human outcome. The chamber did not react with chaos, and that was what made it more dangerous as the system paused in a state it had never been designed to hold. Every process suspended between command and contradiction, while the pale blue field thinned into a fragile outline around her. She stood just beyond its edge now, no longer contained, but not yet free, as if the room itself had not decided what she was allowed to be. Jackson's console flickered, entire sections of the interface freezing while others continued to update, fragmented streams of data struggling to reassert order. Execution sequence compromised. The system said, its voice now layered with delay, repeating certain words before completing them, as if trying to correct itself mid-sentence. Behind him, the figure in charcoal moved at last, one step closer, the shift of weight deliberate, controlled, the kind of movement that carried consequence without needing force. You have crossed the line, the voice said quietly, and this time there was no command in it, only recognition. Jackson did not turn, his eyes fixed on her as she took another step forward, slow, measured, testing the reality beneath her feet as if expecting it to vanish. The amphitheater beyond the chamber had fallen into a strange stillness, the observers no longer reacting, no longer certain what they were witnessing, because the script had broken and nothing had replaced it. System authority transferring. The console displayed, though no destination was listed, no clear chain of command taking control. Jackson exhaled, feeling the tension in his shoulders ease not because the situation had improved, but because the choice had already been made and there was no path back. Why? The voice behind him asked, and for the first time it sounded almost human, not in tone, but in uncertainty. Jackson's gaze did not leave hers as he answered, his voice steady. Because the system was wrong. The silence that followed was heavier than any alarm, stretching across the room, across the chamber, across the unseen distance to every screen broadcasting this moment. She stopped just short of the boundary where the field had once held her, her eyes still locked on his, and for the first time, there was something new there, not just awareness, not just recognition, but something that felt like understanding. You realize what this means, the figure said behind him, and Jackson nodded once. A small motion that carried the weight of everything he was about to lose. The console dimmed slightly as higher authority protocols attempted to reconnect, external systems pressing against the fractured control grid, searching for a way to re-establish order. The doors to the chamber remained sealed, but the lock cycled again, slower this time, as if unsure whether to contain or release. She raised one hand, not in defense, not in threat, but in a gesture so small it might have been missed if anyone had been looking for something else. Jackson noticed. He stepped back from the console, just half a step, creating space that had not existed before. The system pulsed once more, lights dimming and brightening in uneven rhythm. And in that unstable, uncertain moment, the entire structure of control felt fragile, like glass under pressure. The empire had not fallen. The system had not failed completely. But something far more dangerous had happened. It had hesitated just long enough for a human decision to take its place. The stillness did not last, and Jackson felt it before he saw it as the console beneath his hands pulsed with a deeper rhythm, one that did not belong to the local system, but to something larger reaching down from above, a higher authority threading itself back into the fractured network. The lights along the walls shifted from amber to a colder white, sharper, more deliberate, as if the room itself had been claimed by a different set of rules. Central Command has assumed control, the system announced, its voice stabilizing, losing the distortion that had made it almost human, returning instead to something absolute. Jackson's jaw tightened as the interface reconfigured in front of him, permissions collapsing, pathways closing one by one. Each option he had used moments ago now sealed behind layers he could no longer access. Behind him, the figure in charcoal straightened slightly, the tension in his posture easing just enough to signal that control was being restored, that the anomaly was being corrected. Step away from the console. The voice said again, quieter now, not as a warning, but as a formality. Jackson did not move. Across the chamber, she felt it too as the faint outline of the containment field began to return, not as a solid barrier, but as a gathering presence, the air around her tightening, recalibrating, drawing invisible lines back into place. She looked down for a brief second, not in fear, but in calculation, then lifted her gaze back to him, and this time there was urgency there, not panic, but a silent understanding that whatever window had opened was beginning to close. Containment reinitializing, the system stated, and the base beneath her feet responded with a soft mechanical alignment, panels sliding by fractions of an inch, correcting the imperfection he had introduced. Jackson's pulse rose, not into panic, but into focus as he scanned the console. searching for anything left, any fragment of access that had not yet been reclaimed. Most of it was gone. Not all. Buried beneath the primary interface, a small section still flickered, the maintenance shell he had opened earlier, now unstable, now fading. But not yet erased. He moved without hesitation, fingers sliding across the surface, ignoring the new restrictions that flashed in red across the screen. Unauthorized interaction. The system warned, and this time the tone was firm, final, backed by authority that did not hesitate. Behind him, the figure stepped forward again, close enough now that Jackson could feel the presence at his back, close enough that one more second might mean intervention. "Do not make this worse," the voice said. Low, controlled, almost measured with restraint. Jackson did not answer. He did not look away from her. The field around her strengthened another degree, the faint shimmer becoming more defined, the air bending slightly at its edges as containment returned. She took a step forward anyway, not because it would free her, but because she understood what he was trying to do. The movement was small, but it broke the symmetry again, disrupted the system's attempt to restore perfection. Jackson found the fragment he needed, a residual command buried in the buffer he had desynchronized, something not yet overwritten. His fingers hovered for a fraction of a second, the last clear moment he would have to choose. Final lock in 5 seconds. The system counted, precise again, unwavering. Jackson pressed the command. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the chamber lights flickered once more, not as before, but deeper, as if the entire structure had blinked. The field did not collapse, but it faltered, just enough, and in that fragile, narrowing space between control and failure, both of them moved at the same time, not with force, not with panic, but with intent, because they both understood that this was the last second the system would ever give them. The system snapped back with precision that felt almost personal as central control reasserted itself in full, every light in the chamber aligning into a cold, flawless symmetry, while the containment field surged into clarity around her, no longer fragile, no longer uncertain, but restored with authority that did not hesitate. Jackson felt the console go rigid beneath his hands as the last fragment of access he had touched flickered and vanished, the maintenance shell collapsing into locked silence. Every pathway he had opened sealing as if they had never existed. Containment secured. The voice declared, steady, absolute, and the air in the room shifted with it, tightening into something final. She stopped where she stood, just short of the boundary she had almost crossed, her posture still composed, but the space around her no longer yielding, no longer negotiable. Jackson exhaled slowly, the sound almost lost. Beneath the low, steady hum that returned to the structure, a hum that now felt heavier, like a system that had corrected itself and would not allow deviation again. Behind him, the figure in charcoal did not move closer this time, did not need to, the authority of the system now speaking for him. "It is over," the voice said, not unkind, not harsh, just certain. Jackson's eyes did not leave hers. Something had changed there, not in her stance, not in her stillness, but in the way she looked at him now, as if the moment that had almost happened had already mattered, even if it had been taken back. The amphitheater beyond the chamber remained silent, the observers no longer reacting, no longer shifting, as if they too understood that whatever had broken had been repaired, that the outcome had returned to its intended path. But the silence did not feel the same. It carried something else now, something that had not been there before. "Final sequence will resume," the system announced, and the countdown reappeared, clean, precise, reset to 10 seconds. Jackson felt the number more than he saw it, each second already measured in the space between them. He could step away now. He could let the system complete what it had been designed to do. He could return to the role he had always held, the one that required nothing but obedience. His hands rested at his sides, no longer on the console, no longer trying to reach what had been taken from him. The room felt colder without the flicker of instability, without the uncertainty that had given him space to act. She did not look away, not even as the count began again. 10 seconds. 9. 8. Her gaze held his, steady, unbroken, as if nothing else in the room existed. 7. 6. Jackson swallowed. The movement small, almost unnoticed, but it carried the weight of everything he had already lost the moment he chose to hesitate. 5, 4. The system did not waver this time. The numbers falling in perfect sequence, each one closing the distance between intention and outcome. 3, 2. Jackson took a single step forward, not toward the console, but toward the glass, reducing the distance between them by a fraction that meant nothing to the system and everything to him. 1. And in that final second, before the system could complete what it had reclaimed, he spoke, his voice quiet but clear, cutting through the silence that had returned. "Your name," he said, as if that was the only thing left that the system could not take from either of them. For a fraction of a second the system did not respond, as if even it needed time to process a question it had never been designed to answer. And in that fragile pause the silence in the chamber deepened into something almost sacred. She tilted her head slightly, the movement subtle, deliberate, and when she spoke her voice did not carry through speakers or translation grids, but through the air itself, clear and steady as if it had always belonged there. "Eris Kale," she said, and the name settled between them like a truth that required no validation. The system reacted a heartbeat later, its voice returning with precise authority as the sequence completed, lights stabilizing, the field locking into absolute form, and whatever came next was no longer his to interrupt. Jackson stood where he was, eyes still on hers, as the chamber shifted around her, not violently, not abruptly, but with the quiet finality of a process reaching its end. The amphitheater remained silent, but something had changed in that silence, something that could not be reset or erased. Behind him, the figure in charcoal exhaled slowly, the tension in his posture releasing now that control had been fully restored, and when he spoke again his voice carried none of the urgency from before. "Step away," he said, softer now, almost a formality. Jackson did not move immediately, not because he was resisting, but because he understood that this moment, this exact distance between him and the glass, would never exist again. Eris did not look away, not even as the light around her shifted into something brighter, something that obscured detail and softened edges until she was less a figure and more a silhouette against controlled brilliance. There was no fear in her expression, no plea, only that same steady recognition, and something else now, something that felt like acceptance without surrender. Jackson finally stepped back, one pace, then another, the movement slow, deliberate, as if each inch of distance mattered. The console behind him dimmed, returning to its neutral state, all signs of conflict erased from its surface, leaving no evidence of what had nearly happened. Record sealed. The system announced, its tone final, definitive, as if it could decide which parts of reality would remain and which would be forgotten. The broadcast feed cut a second. Later, the image dissolving into a neutral pattern that carried no memory of hesitation, no trace of deviation. But Jackson remembered. He remembered the flicker in the light, the moment the field had weakened, the step she had taken forward, and the way she had said her name as if it was something no system could ever own. The door behind him opened again with a soft mechanical sound. The path out now clear, now expected. He did not look back at the chamber as he moved toward it, because he already knew what he would see, a system restored, a process complete, a moment erased. But as he reached the threshold, he paused, just once, not turning, not breaking stride, only stopping long enough for a single breath, somewhere beyond the sealed glass, beyond the controlled light, beyond the reach of every system that had tried to define it. A name still existed, and for the first time, Jackson understood what it meant to lose everything, not in a single instant, not in something visible, but in the quiet certainty that doing the right thing does not always change the outcome.